Welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, where we celebrate recruiting by exploring the stories of leaders and top performers by digging into their stories and understanding how recruiting has impacted their journey and their success. Welcome to another edition of the Recruiting Stories podcast, powered by Cover 3 Consulting. This week, our guest is Michael Sarraille. He's a retired U.S. Navy SEAL officer, former enlisted recon Marine and scout sniper. He is the CEO of Talent War Group. It's a specialized executive search firm and talent advisory firm. He's also a former principal of a management consulting firm called Echelon Front. He started that alongside Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, who you may know of from the book Extreme Ownership, among other things. Mike has an extensive background in talent management and in leadership. He additionally, in his time serving, is the recipient of a Silver Star, 6 Bronze Stars for Valor, 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals, and a Purple Heart. This guy obviously has been there, has served our country, and achieved great things while leading others. He's been able to translate that into the business world as well, even having a degree from the McCombs School of Business at Texas, getting his MBA there, has his undergrad from Texas A&M, and has attended Stanford as well. So the guy's seen and done a lot of different things, and that's just a small piece of his background. So I'm looking forward to digging in. We're going to talk about his recruiting story, what took him into the Special Forces, some of the people that helped shape how he got there, helped him shape his mindset on recruiting. We're going to talk about performance, what that looks like in the Special Forces community. We're going to talk about what it takes for someone to get there, and what pieces of the Special Forces recruiting process and training process can and should be translated into the business world when we think about talent, when we think about leadership, and how to effectively lead and manage our teams today. It's an awesome conversation. Can't wait to share it with you guys. If you have questions for me, reach out to me afterwards, and you can connect with Mike on LinkedIn at Michael Sarraille. He's on every other major platform as well: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you can reach out to talk with him further on talentwargroup.com. All right, welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, guys. Today, our guest is Michael Sarraille. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Mike, obviously, we just went through on our introduction of your background, right? And tons of things that you've done. Obviously, founder of the Talent War Group, written the Talent War book, scout sniper, Navy SEAL, lots of different things that you've done. Would you mind giving our listeners just a background, kind of what got you into the Special Forces community, into the military, and a little bit of your recruiting story?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what got me into the military was a perfect story about what a talent magnet should be. I was born in the Bay Area of California, not exactly a hotbed for military recruitment. And didn't necessarily come from a military lineage at all. My grandfather served in the military in World War II, but so did pretty much everyone else's. So I met a forced recon Marine, a guy named Staff Sergeant Ben Post. And the guy was just a leader. And as a 19-year-old, you look at this guy who, had a physical stature about him, was humbly confident, was highly respectful to everyone, smiled. You just wanted to be that dude. You're like, I want to be just like that dude. Yeah. And so that's what pushed me over the edge to go down to the recruiting office and enlist in the Marine Corps. And I did become a recon Marine. I also became a scout sniper. And then I worked with some Navy SEALs. And I'm like, man, that's my next challenge. And every time, people talk about the SEALs, world's toughest military training, that's safe to say in terms of how they conduct their assessment and selection. And so I made the leap from the Marine Corps after the Marine Corps sent me back to school to become an officer, and entered the SEAL training, made it through that training. It has an 80% attrition rate, and then went to war because war was going on. Multiple deployments to Iraq, hit the Battle of Ramadi in 2006, the Battle of Sadr City in 2008, came back. And then I took a role in what you could say is the leadership development role for young officers graduating out of the SEAL pipeline. And so I got them for 1 month after they made it through all the hard training. And it was a mixture of classroom and experiential training.
Were you recruited into that?
I'm sorry?
Were you recruited into that program, or did you seek that out?
No. Because the war was going on. I wanted to continue going back to war. And they actually, they pulled me off the line.
Yeah.
And I was not happy about it.
Sure.
And I had a senior leader that said, hey, listen, we're not doubting you're good on the battlefield, proving that even more so than my peers. But the reason we're pulling you because you're cut above your peers is because we need you to train 10 more of you. There's an exponential effect on the organization. I remember one of my leaders using, I think it was the Jack Welch comment, the job of a leader is to create more leaders. Mm-hmm. And so I enjoyed that. I went in with a negative attitude because there was other guys that were going to continue going on deployments. The tour didn't last long, but I put it through a few classes of SEALs and other. In fact, the Air Force Special Operations would send their young officers to go through the same course. And so that's where I really got into the leadership development and the programmatics of it. But it wasn't long-lived before I received an invitation to try out for the Joint Special Operations Command. And that's another cut above special operations. To give you a sense, the SEALs, we would consider an elite talent pool. Well, only 2% of that elite talent pool makes it to GASOC. Wow. Okay. And you talk about one of the most thorough behavioral interview processes there is. It's also long in length. Right. But that is a completely different world. And served there for a number of years, then eventually close to retirement, got my MBA, and then retired out of the SEAL teams after 20 years. And when I made that transition, my MBA course was more a process of elimination, of finding out what I wanted to do. And I came in thinking investment banking, private equity, venture capital, and quickly I learned, hey, that's not playing to my strengths. Sure. I don't want to put in 4 a.m. hours to midnight in investment banking. I've already done that in the military. Yeah. And value creation was really my niche, is creating something from scratch. And as I looked at different spaces, I met somebody within executive search. They were talking about their passion for building teams, identifying talent. I'm like, hey, I know something about that. Right. And so entered into this space to hopefully disrupt it a little bit and bring a fresh set of eyes on how you build truly elite teams, but now in the private sector.
One of the things that I appreciate that you've said on not all of, but many of the steps that you've taken is that you met someone. Like at some point you met someone and it was like either an inspiration or they said, hey, I'm going to recruit you over here. The one that we'll talk maybe about a couple, but the 4th Recon Marine, was that just like a happenstance, like you spoke at your school or family friend?
I had a very short stint in college and I met him. He went on the same Marine Corps program where they sent him back to school. Okay. Years before the Marine Corps sent me. I wasn't even in the Marine Corps then. And so I got to know him pretty well. And he was just, you talk about just confident that he could accomplish anything, humble enough to know that he was going to stumble along the way. Yeah. But that's your best sort of source of talent, is the people that you put out in public. People from your company are the greatest recruiting tool you'll ever have. Mm-hmm. They're either representing your organization professionally or they're destroying your reputation. I will say this, as we talk, and a lot of what talent acquisition is in the talent game is it comes down to leadership. It is a subset of leadership, but it's one of the most important subsets. In everything that you talked about, I did something because I met somebody doing this and they motivated me. They impressed me. Everything I know about leadership is from all the coaches and mentors I've had along the way. And I've had the fortunate pleasure of serving for some of the most, let's say, world's elite leaders, from Admiral McCraven to other individuals. And, all of the things I know about leadership is just recycled material. But guess what? They learned it from a series of coaches and mentors, and they recycled it down to me. That's all leadership is. There's no more original thoughts on leadership at all. Anyone who tells you otherwise, if you go back, you'll identify that they're plagiarizing from somewhere. That's the highest form of flattery.
Right. But what a better place to learn and to grow than to surround yourself with unbelievable people, right? And obviously, special forces community in the military is an elite place to do that. You had a great benefit. Not only did you perform at a high level, but you put yourself in a position to say, "Hey, because I performed at such a high level, I can be around such incredible talent that I can learn what leadership really looks like."
Iron sharpens iron, so as one man sharpens another.
Right.
It's you are a product of the people you surround yourself with, and I just always surrounded myself with people that were better than me at literally everything,
Hmm.
and eventually, I earned the right to just sustain their friendship and
Right.
maintain a role in the groups. But I was never the high performer. Trust me, I was surrounded with by men and women that were just there's no other word to use than awesome. They were just
Hmm.
awesome at what they did, and they were great leaders.
You talk about that in the Talent War book. You talk about humility. So, right, humility is not necessarily this. Hey, I don't have an ego or I don't have self-esteem, but it's saying, hey, I know what I'm capable of, and honestly self-assessing yourself consistently. Because if I can do that, then you can put somebody around you who's going to make you better where you may not be quite as good, which I think is incredible.
Yeah, people get the definition of humility. Usually, I use this word, um, you know, humble confidence.
Hmm.
I tie those two together.
Yeah.
Somebody who's lived life and continually pushed the edge and has fallen time and time again and learned. He's already been humbled by life, he or she, and they're confident that no matter the obstacle you throw in front of them, they will find a way.
Right.
They're not going to find the way on the first try or the second try, or maybe it's going to be the 20th, but they will find a way. And humility. We accepted failure as part of the process,
Hmm.
and it doesn't mean that with each accomplishment we didn't grow in pride.
Right.
If we balanced our pride correctly and didn't let that transform into ego, then we were confident that no matter what the president threw at us, no matter how asymmetric the problem was, and we proved this time and time again. We were handed some problems. We're like, oh boy, I don't have
Right.
an idea how to even approach this one.
Right.
But we pull our team in again, these amazing men and women. And as a leader, I'd say, hey, here's what we know. How do we accomplish this? And I swear to God, it had to be one out of every 100 times that I actually had the idea that we went for. But somebody in my team would. And then
Right.
we would just test that idea, iterate until we knew that it had a high probability of success. And sometimes that took months. Sometimes that took hours. It depended on the mission set that we were handed down from the president.
And it speaks to the culture of the special forces community as well, to say like, hey, let's create an environment and a culture that says, yeah, you can fail, and we can try some things until we figure out the solution. And we so many times I don't see that with organizations either I work with or I just look at. It's hey, try to succeed. If you don't hit whatever number, if you don't do the thing that works, we're gonna get you out of here. So speak to that a little bit more.
So we had a tool in the military, not just special operations, a tool that is so rarely used in the private sector. And if it is, it's used incorrectly. But that tool is called the after action review. Some people call it a debrief. Some people call it a postmortem. But postmortem, they usually implies death, that something went wrong, and they only debrief things when things go wrong. So the after action review is the single greatest tool to developing not only your personnel at an individual level,
Mhm.
but developing the organization to maintain the sense of learning and continual adaptation to remain relevant in the market. Now, when you use this correctly and leaders set the tone, it also breeds this sense of vulnerability. And you want people to be vulnerable with each other. This vulnerability and authenticity that, hey, if you raise your hand, you're like, hey, I want to admit a mistake, and nobody comes down on you, what you've set is you're now allowing other people to say, hey, that's okay. And in fact, thank you for sharing your mistake. I'm going to learn from what you went through. Hopefully, if I end up in that same scenario, given what you've told me, I do something then different. And everyone's throwing out their mistakes. Everyone's taking ownership.
Mhm.
But again, I work with some large corporations, Fortune 500s. And when I talk about this process, people are like, no way am I going to admit any mistake. They're like, if I were to do that,
right,
I would throw a bullseye on their back.
mm-hmm.
And when they tell me this, because maybe I'm so warped by special operations that's foreign to me. I'm like, well, what culture would ever come down on somebody for having the moral courage to raise their hand and say, hey, I screwed up here.
Yeah.
Somebody does that. I actually look at them in a different light. I'm gonna throw my arms around them and say, hey, it's okay. Let's help you learn from this. Let's in fact let them make sure the organization learns from this. You didn't lose. We learned.
Right.
What matters is we solve the problem. We move on together. We would conduct an after-action review at the end of the day, after every training evolution, and especially every real-world mission. And I'm going to tell you, when I work with companies and I talk about this concept, and in fact, Dan Coyle, author of the Talent Code and Culture Code, actually came to the SEAL team I was at, and we talked to him about this process, and he was amazed. And he actually wrote about it in his book. Culture Code is, again, breeding this vulnerability and authenticity, which you want within your culture. But a lot of business leaders look at me and say, hey, Mike, that's great in the military and all, but we don't have the time in the private sector to do that. And that is just the softball. I'm always waiting for one person to raise their hand and say that. It's like, thank you. And I say, what I'm really hearing from the individuals that just asked that question is you don't care about the continual development and improvement of your personnel, your people, and your organization.
Yep.
And I tell them about my average day in Afghanistan, where I was deployed for 4 months, getting anywhere from 4 to 5 hours of sleep a day, in a combat zone, running missions nightly. And even though we're exhausted, we're dehydrated, we just got back from a firefight, hiking in the mountains for 8 hours. And even though we all want to go to bed, we actually should all step into a room and conduct an after-action review, knowing that there's maybe one piece of information that we got from that mission. Maybe our competition, our enemy, is adjusting, and that means we need to adjust at a faster rate. And if it took 2 hours, even though we're tired, that's what professionals do.
Right.
And for any business leader to tell me they don't have the time, unfortunately, I'm going to tell you, there's no other way to say it. That's a cop-out. That's
absolutely. I mean, the way I relate, I'm obviously never spending any time in the special forces, but I was a student athlete. I was an athlete. And so for me, I would go back to film, right? Every single day, I watched film and I watched myself screw up. We all got in a room as soon as practice was over or the next day. And we watched if I screwed up that play, right? That's okay. Here's how to do it correctly. And again, it wasn't judgment, right? It was, hey, this is the process that you have to go through to improve. Because if we never watched any film, right? If you never found solutions, then how on earth are you going to improve if you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? That's the whole definition of insanity thing. You've got to implement somewhere some process that says, go through it, watch the film.
Every leader wants their people to step up to a greater degree, take things off their plate so that they can remove the blinders. And as a leader, I want to be looking, up and out to make better strategic decisions. Well, how do you get there? Well, one, you're going to have to build relationships with your people. People aren't going to trust you if you don't build relationships. And at the end of the day, you as a leader don't get to decide whether you're a good leader or not. That's not your decision to make. Right. But if you want your people to step up, you have to utilize this process, the after-action review. And if we dissect that, what is that really doing? It's coaching and mentoring. You just said when you missed a play, I'm going to use football, you missed a tackle because you should have zigged when you zagged. Mm-hmm. Is a great coach, as you're watching that tape, says, hey, what were you thinking when you zagged? And sort of through the Socratic method is helping you develop your critical thinking, your skills, elevate your game. And if a leader spends enough time coaching and mentoring his people, they eventually start to elevate the bar. This doesn't happen overnight. It takes sometimes weeks, months, if not years. But you put that time in. You're actually in future time. You're actually putting time in the bank because you now have a more capable workforce that frees you up to make better decisions.
100%. And I think back to a quote. You talk about building relationships with your team. And it took me a while to learn this. Like I think of when I was an athlete, at first I was offended, when I might get called out in front of my team because I screwed something up in a game or in practice. But I think it was a basketball coach, but he said, when you love somebody, you tell them the truth, right? And so for me, that was the thing I had to realize was like, man, a coach correcting me, a manager correcting me, a leader correcting me, that's because they actually care. And the more somebody cares, the more they're going to correct me and say, hey, you're capable of more than this. And this is why I'm telling you, this is to save your butt. This is to help you make more money or to do a better job. And that is where that relationship suddenly starts to build, because, man, that guy cares for me. That gal cares for me. It's a big deal.
So here's the question everyone's asking now is, well, how do I build a relationship in a virtual environment?
Right.
And again, we had Dan Coyle on with Rich Davini, who was the author of The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. He was a Navy SEAL, much more senior than I was. And we were at the same command together. The book is worth picking up. He went very deep into the different attributes, which he put in different buckets about performance. And then George Randall, the co-author, and Dan Coyle, he said it. He's like, you can't build a relationship over a virtual environment, not a genuine relationship.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of employers struggle with this. And as the CEO of a company, this one's easy. We're not engaging in a remote workforce. Do we let our people work from home every, one day a week and we rotate? Yeah, absolutely. But we need to be in the office collaborating with each other in arguing over different courses of action with problem sets or where we want to take the company in order to develop those relationships. We spend time with each other outside the office to build those relationships. Usually it involves alcohol. But that's just because it frees inhibitions, gets people out. But the reality is, I don't care what anyone's writing in Forbes or Wall Street Journal. You can't build a esprit de corps, a cohesion amongst your workforce in a virtual environment. You can argue. Maybe I need to open my mind, and of course, I want to listen to people in their perspectives. I just don't see it. I mean, could you imagine if we had a Navy SEAL platoon and said, hey, guys, you go live in Arkansas, you go live in Texas, you go live in Oklahoma, we'll do this virtually. And even though they can engage in individual training, they step on the battlefield, they're going to lose.
Absolutely.
They're going to get crushed.
Absolutely.
And I know it's not specific to every industry. All right.
Prove me wrong, right?
Yeah.
Prove me wrong. I had a young man that I mentored for a little while, and he told me he was dating a girl, and I said, "Oh, that's cool. How long you been seeing her? Where'd you meet her?" And he's like, "Oh, well, we haven't met yet." I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" And he said, "Oh, we've been texting a lot, and things like that." I said, "Hey, that's cool. You're not dating, right? Like, you're not dating this girl if you've never." I was like, "Have you ever hung out with her?" And he's like, "No, I mean, I met her through a friend of mine, and we've just been." I said, "Hey, you got to go on a date and see her in person before you can ever actually accomplish anything, before you can actually say, hey, we're dating for sure. Because otherwise, you don't know, man. You don't know." So
to date somebody virtually and just jump into marriage, that's a recipe.
Right.
For, again,
good luck.
That's not a genuine relationship. You live with the person, you're seeing them day to day.
Right.
Yeah, I trust me, I understand the dilemma that a lot of these large corporations are in, having to allow a lot of their workforce to work remotely. But again, I could point to the fact that a lot of these large corporations don't have a shared adversity amongst their people anyways. They've got the luxury of major capital behind their brands, and then brand identity. And that's what's keeping them afloat. But history is littered with organizations that were on top that, became, let's say, culturally bereft and are no longer with us. You look at the Blockbusters of the world, which at the height of it, they were opening a new Blockbuster store every 17 minutes. Innovation and adaptation started to die within the culture because the leadership allowed that. And they weren't thinking far enough ahead, where Netflix came in and is now a Fortune 500. So culture is a big issue with me. Again, much like a leader doesn't get to decide if they're a great leader, you don't get to decide what your culture is. You may push the culture in a specific direction, but ultimately the litmus test is, do your people reflect those cultural values in their day-to-day behavior? Do you reflect those cultural values in your day-to-day behavior?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a challenge. I want to read a quote that you had in the book that I love, and maybe transition a little bit to talking about talent acquisition, right? And what that looks like a little bit, and your, I guess, philosophy on some of that. The quote is: "Talent is universal and eternal, and talent wins every time. It climbs over obstacles and delivers results. It finds a way to victory. Talent is the answer." Um, so ultimately, kind of saying, "Hey, this is like the golden calf here." When we talk about business, if you want to win, if you want to succeed in business and organizations, this is it. So I guess maybe dive into what you mean by that, and then I want to talk about really defining talent, because I see a lot of companies who struggle with saying, "Hey, I need this role, but I really can't define what talent looks like to me in my organization."
Just it brings it home when we replace that word talent with people.
Hmm.
It's people. Your people are your greatest competitive advantage. Will be, it always will be. In special operations, we have 5 what we call special operations forces truths, and each of them are axioms that we live by. And each 5 of them revolve around people. That people are your greatest strength, not the technology. Your technology doesn't bring itself to market. Your technology doesn't solve problems when there's an actual problem with the technology. It's your people. And I don't care what industry you're in. You can be in tech, you can be in investment banking. While you're in the business of that, guess what? Every business is also in the business of one other thing. And the ones that get this right understand it's your people. You are all in the business of people. And if you get the people part right, usually everything else falls into line. Again, we look at great leaders that understood this, and there's no better than Jack Welch and how he led GE. And when people ask, what's the role of a CEO? He said, my role is people. I mean, the fact that he would break away for when they did leadership development, I understand his time is spoken for from probably 4 a.m. till about midnight. And he made time to develop his people. When you put time into your hiring process and you actually develop a process that evolves and takes it seriously, and if you let a bad hire in, actually has a conversation of what did we miss in that interview that we should have picked off, and how do we prevent that happening again during our hiring process. When you have leaders that understand that have this talent mindset, and I'll define it for you. A talent mindset, that how we define it is the foundational belief. Foundational. It is a core belief that people are your greatest strategic competitive advantage. Bottom line, full stop.
Absolutely.
But what does every CEO say? Oh, of course, people are our most important thing. That's great. I say a lot of things too. What ultimately matters is what I do.
Right. So how do you define that then when you say, okay, people? I say people are the most important thing. I still have to define what kind of people go into my organization, right? So many times I'll work with an organization and they say, hey, I need XYZ role, right? I say, great. What does XYZ role need to do to succeed? And what kind of person are you looking for? What attributes do they need that are going to help them succeed within the culture of your organization, right? And sometimes I'll just get, can they do this, right? So how would you help somebody say, hey, how do we define that? How do we define talent?
Yeah, so it's coming up with what we call defining success is one of the first steps. And sometimes defining success is as easy as just looking at your rock stars or A players, whatever your organization wants to call them. And they say, how do we find more Adrians? He is like one of our best performers. How do we find more of him? How do we define him? How do we dissect him and say, what are the things that make him so good, or Sarah, what makes her so good? And then creating the talent profiles of what they're looking for. Yes, I understand the performance outcomes. This person must step into this role and hit these key performance indicators or performance metrics. Got it. Those are the outcomes. But ultimately, we have to dive a little further. This is, what is the cultural values that define your organization? And I'm sure you get this. Very few people can articulate that like that. Yep. Oh, well, this is who you are. Let me explain what we believe. Very few people have that answer almost memorized, or it's just become such muscle memory they can just sort of blurted out within 1 minute. And that's why we got to dive deep into these companies. And there's a lot of times we hear what the CEO is saying, but that's what they're preaching. It's not necessarily what they do. And we look at some clients and say, hey, we don't think we're the best fit for you. Because
absolutely.
We also interview other people within the company. So CEO comes to me and says, hey, we want a COO. We'll ask to talk to 5 different people within the organization. And that's where sometimes—
But you learn a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it either reinforces that, like, hey, this is legit. This is a company that believes in leadership, or, oh, they've got a host of problems. There's no way we're going to put somebody in this organization. It'll just— we've seen this movie. We know how this ends up, especially if we place a good leader into a toxic environment. That good
Absolutely.
leader around.
Absolutely. Talk about for a minute. You talked about in the book about the idea of, hey, hire for character, train for skill. Right? We want to talk about character first. We just talked about defining that talent. I guess, why do companies fixate so much on I need this much experience, this much industry experience, rather than the character side? And I guess, what can we do to help them understand that we can train for that industry experience that they need?
Well, this one hits me personally as I got out of the SEAL teams, in which, again, I'm not patting myself on the back. I mean, it's just facts. I served at a level that 98% of the SEALs couldn't reach. Mm-hmm. And from this elite group that was selected specifically because of their attributes, and dealt with problem sets that would make most people just curl into the fetal position. But we found a way to succeed. And then I stepped into an MBA program as a 39-year-old, surrounded by a bunch of 27-year-olds that are smarter than me. And, I graduate one of the national Poets and Quants MBAs to watch. Trust me, I was not as smart as these young kids who are going to have amazing careers and just skyrocket over me. But special operations is a perfect example. I mean, the business world is fascinated with how special operations has built these elite teams, these small elite teams that often go against larger competitors, or what we call a numerically superior force, and come out on top time and time again.
Right.
So special operations doesn't hire for industry experience because there is none.
Right.
There's none. I can't go to a high school and say, everyone, the 400 seniors, who here has special operations experience? No one will raise their hand. So by nature of the talent pool that we pull from high school graduates and college graduates, we had to become very good at selecting for talent. Now, human beings are not good at judging potential. And so it's taken decades, in fact, over a century and a half, to just fine-tune this process that is continually evolving to this day. Because what was needed in the SEAL teams or the Green Berets when I was in is going to be different 5 years from now, with a very different enemy, which could include cybersecurity. That could be one of the fronts they fight on. So they put a lot of time into that process, more so than any corporation I've ever met. And we brought in industrial organizational psychologists. The bottom line is we're always creating this feedback loop. And we're always asking that question. If somebody made it into the SEAL teams, served a good while, and then did something unethical, we have that conversation of, what the hell did we miss?
Yeah.
Why did that person even get past our assessment and into the organization? Or was it they had a bad series of mentors that led them to believe that behavior was good? We have those conversations. And a lot of corporations or businesses don't. They don't take the time to have that fight. And it doesn't have to be an hour conversation. It can be a brass tacks, get to the point, 30 minutes. Hey, we need to change the way we hire. As I finished my MBA program, and again, nobody wants to hire a 40-year-old that doesn't have industry experience. I had a select group of people that wanted me to come work for them, but there was other people that were just like, hey, you don't have any marketing experience. You don't have any, manufacturing experience.
Sure.
You're a great guy, but we can't take you. I think, the men and women I served with are the perfect example. They get out after 20-year careers, and they've already overtaken the people to their left and right. They step into a company, and all of a sudden they're the COO of the company for the way they lead. While experience may tell you where somebody's been, character tells you where somebody's going. And that's why you always hire. There's a lot of people with industry experience that were hired by these companies, and then COVID hit, and they utterly lacked character, and they shut down. They couldn't operate in an environment defined by volatility and ambiguity. They couldn't make decisions in the face of incomplete information. Where people of high character, and I'm not talking about people from the military, just general people of high character came in and said, hey, the end state doesn't change. Our constraints have, but based off the information we're seeing, we got to act. We're going to make a decision. I don't know if it's the right decision, but we're going to start moving left. We're going to start moving that direction.
What an opportunity, right? Like an opportunity. If that's what the situation was with COVID, I mean, that's an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to help lead us out of here, right? Even if I don't know everything, I've got an opportunity here. If you were willing to step up.
Yes. And so, I mean, the same thing, and I know this goes to a different point, is you saw which workforces, which organizations were investing in their people through leadership development, coaching, and mentoring from 2015 to 2019. Those organizations hit COVID. And of course, they stumbled just like everyone else, but they're thriving. They're coming out the backside of this stronger, where some of their competitors went to the wayside. You always have to invest in your people. We follow what we preach. We conduct morning training, not every morning, but we'll pull our young subordinate leaders in from 9 to 9:30, and we'll talk about time management. We'll talk about leadership. We'll talk about the hard skills of the industry and things that they need to pick up. We'll read a book together and dissect it. Mm-hmm. But we've seen this exponential return from our people. They're getting better. I gave them one class on reverse planning, which is a tool we use heavily. Start with the outcomes and move backwards, identifying critical points of failure. The next day, they're coming to me with their plans using reverse planning. And I just smile. I'm like, how's that working out for you? They're like, we love it.
Absolutely.
So that's our job. That's because I've had great mentors, is to pass that information down, because guess what? I'm going to leave Talent War Group eventually. I want to make sure that this organization actually, they're like, great, Mike is finally out of the way, and they skyrocket to a different level. And I'm good with that. That's not going to hurt my ego, because I'll be a emeritus board director and still be getting income. So I'm good with that.
Sure. That's awesome. Well, as we wrap up here, couple of stuff. One of the things that I love that you talked about is that constant feedback loop, right? And you talked about that with, training the people that you have, constantly reevaluating. One of the things is just having a process to say, hey, if this is talent, we're going to say no to what's not talent. And you use that example in the book multiple times where you said, hey, if someone does not meet criteria to be a special forces operator, that's okay. They might be a great person. They might fit somewhere else in society, but they're not going to go in here. How do you, especially if someone's kind of like, man, we have a need right now, how do you say no there, right? Because all the time, I'll have people say, hey, I've got this need. We got to put a butt in the seat right now. How do you help people say no?
There's a quote that I take from a guy named Charlie Beckwith. He was the founder of Delta Force, which is sort of like one of the premier special operations units. And he said, I'd rather go down the river, referring to Vietnam. He was a Vietnam veteran Silver Star recipient, but he was a disruptor because he created what is America's counterterrorism force now. And he said, I'd rather go down the river with 7 studs than 100 shitheads. Excuse my language. He had a colorful way of talking. But he basically said, I would rather go with 7 capable people than just filling seats with quantity. That never works out. And one hire has the potential to poison or hopefully multiply your culture. Now, Charlie Beckwith, in one of his proteges, General Jerry Boykin, who we interviewed in the book, said, your culture restarts with every single hire. Even if you've been around for 10 years and you bring somebody to work the line, your culture resets. And it's got to assimilate that person to they've got to assimilate and align them to the cultural values of the organization. And if you realize you made a mistake, within the first month or 2, get rid of that person as quickly as possible. That's it. But my answer to that is no. So let me go back to the process. And I know we got to wrap up here. The process is going to be different for every organization. We didn't say in the book, follow this process. No, we said you have to develop your own. Here are some best practices that the special operations community uses. But what works for GE isn't going to work for Goldman Sachs. So you've got to understand that. Yes, go out and look at best practices, maybe incorporate it, test it out, see if it enhances your process. But you've got to resist once you have a process that sort of is proven or has a higher probability of good hires, resist deviating from that. I understand growth and we need headcount now. When you do that, that's when the bad hires start to happen.
Yep. Good. Well, good. Couple questions as we wrap up here. One, a lot of young talented people in the logistics and transportation industry, which is what we serve most of the time, listening to this. If you had to give yourself some advice, 20-year-old self, starting a career, looking where you are now, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah. Stay in the now. Stay in the now. My old man once told me, and I didn't understand it for a number of years. He said, life is a mystery to be lived, not a puzzle to be solved. Stay in the now, focus on being the best you can in the now. And that will eventually build and build and build until you become this great leader. I would also say, and this holds true for the history of man, is people will be what people can see. And that means if you're in a leadership billet, it doesn't matter what comes out of your mouth. What matters is what you do. And your people are always watching. And if you want to set a culture, if you want to build a culture, the leaders have to follow through on whatever they preach. If you preach about discipline and time management, then you better come through on that. Because the second your people see you deviate from what you preach, you've poisoned the well. 100%. That's why leadership sucks. It's hard.
Right, you got to stand. You got to practice what you preach. Absolutely. Yeah. And then I guess the last question is, any books that you can think of that have been crucial to shaping your career, shaping who you are? Yeah.
Chris Fussell gave me a book. He penned Team of Teams with Stanley Mchrystal. He was one of my you talk about these mentors, man. He's written his own book, but he wrote Team of Teams with Stanley Mchrystal. He once handed me a book that I've held dear and I'm looking at it right now. Once an Eagle. And that book is about two leaders, just a prototypical leader and then just a poisonous leader. And they both ascend to the rank of general in two very different styles, one playing the political game, one being a leader who lives his values. But you've got other books out there, $1 Trillion Coach. Bill Campbell is this infamous coach and mentor, and he was the CEO of Intuit, mentor to the elite in Silicon Valley because they looked up to him. And I had the pleasure of knowing Bill Campbell, and he mentored me a little bit. In the book summarizes his life because he passed away in, I think it was 2017.
Very cool. Well, Mike, I appreciate your time. Just a wealth of wisdom, and hopefully it's helpful to those listening and to the companies we serve as they continue to hunt for the great talent out there, try to achieve something purposeful with their organizations and with their careers. I appreciate it.
Dude, thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiting Stories podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on LinkedIn. Adrian Chapman and Cover 3 Consulting is our company page. Also check out our website, www.cov3consulting.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and we just simply want to remind you that you can change the world by putting people in a position where they can do the most good, and you do that by recruiting. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.